You need to talk, Caravan, so Brady's face gets off of this thing. Oh no, I guess I could just do that.
Gallery mode, baby.
What you got, son?
There we go.
I gotta move.
It's not even a V-neck, dude.
No, that's not a V-neck. That doesn't even have sleeves. I like it.
All right, Son, you're gonna be temporarily covered. Apologies.
That's fair. Should I be temporarily silent as well?
And there you go. There we go. I think we got everyone. I hope the audio is chilling on the YouTube.
We're live?
I think we're live. If anyone wants to tweet it out or say anything, we are live on the.
I'll retweet a corporate account. Do you have a link? Can you send Marcus a link?
I threw the link in the base camp, so it should be there.
Okay.
If anyone wants to throw that out, but we are currently live.
Driveline R&D podcast, episode 28, coming at you live this time, second week in a row. This is Alex Caravan, co-host, co-flag manager of baseball analytics, sipping aesthetic looking Bale Breaker IPA.
Let's go.
Give it a roll on the intros, Lindley.
That worked. Yep.
Kyle Lindley, R&D engineer, driving baseball, drinking a Allegiant Snail Bones. Pretty good. First time having this one.
Mm-hmm. I had a few space tests last night.
It's
like the only illusion you can get out here. But Anthony Brady, Driveline, biomechanist, primary host of the Driveline Research and Drinks podcast. Sorry for my absence last week. Coming to you live, actually, my parents' basement in Idaho, and I got the Grand Teton Brewing Teton Range IPA, straight from Driggs, Idaho.
And our guest, third guest, Mike Sonne, first guest that hasn't technically worked for Driveline, even then barely flying under that radar as the VP of Research for PitchAI, who we've partnered with for bringing you PitchAI features through track. So I guess go ahead, Mike, introduce yourself a little bit and give us the quick and
dirty. Have I emerged? Yeah. Have I emerged from what you were covering me from?
Yeah, I think everyone should be in the right place.
Okay, all right.
I think it's all good.
I wasn't sure if I was supposed to be quiet because you were like, "Oh, there's a thing over you," and I was going to be like,
"Oh yeah."
I'm out of nowhere. Come out from behind the curtain.
Yo, Caravan's got no shirt on.
Yeah. In the future, I could do like a surprise reveal of like the guest or something, just like it pops up and they're
like Mario coming out of
Caravan or a new guest.
Well, people will be disappointed to see me instead of shirtless Caravan,
or both, dude. We just have to have the new guest and me shirtless in the same screen.
Yeah, well, and just for the sake of it, it's a Collective Arts IPA number 14 for the D component of the show today.
Oh,
awesome! Thanks for having me on, guys.
Absolutely.
Really excited,
thanks for having me.
Yeah. We've awesome. This is a very, I feel like, familiar format for us. Just like you and I over the last few months, constantly in Zoom calls back and forth. So, very excited for it to be out. Everything to be out there, finally get launched and get it into like other people's hands.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a real rush to just like keep checking the queue, and there's just video after video going in, and then everybody posting their videos on Twitter and talking about their reports and getting actual user feedback as opposed to like just feedback from like our like kind of crew. It's been really, really exciting. It's been a really really awesome few days just getting this up and off the ground.
Yeah. Do you want to like introduce yourself a little more in terms of background? I guess like what kind of got you into, biomechanics? I mean, before PitchAI and ProPlayAI, like we already had a relationship in some capacity. You with Driveline Baseball, obviously, like you with Kyle, and getting into that. I'm not sure I feel like Caravan and Lindley are both like aware of most of that, like Sonne's relationship with us prior to PitchAI.
I have very little context for that. I think I've overheard a little bit in conversation, but
it's I did my PhD in occupational biomechanics at McMaster in Hamilton, which is also famous for Collective Arts Brewing, Hamilton, Ontario, just outside of Toronto. And as I was finishing up my thesis, what I was primarily working on was a model to predict the amount of muscle fatigue that anybody could incur if they were doing a bout of exercise, or in this case, it was primarily if somebody was working on an assembly line. So primarily an ergonomics focus. And as I finished that thesis and we got that paper published, it was right around the time that Major League Baseball was starting to announce that they were talking about putting in a pitch clock. And, right away I'm kind of thinking, if you have somebody do the same amount of work, but even fractionally reduce their recovery time, their fatigue levels will go up. And I published a paper where I just took a bunch of EMG data that was available online, fed it through my fatigue model, and showed that, we would probably see a real increase, real spike in fatigue. So that's kind of what got me interested in moving from the ergo space to the baseball world. Yeah. I had, done a bunch in athletic therapy throughout my undergrad, but really very little with baseball. It was mostly with football. So around that time, I, that paper came out, and I started doing some work just with baseball.
And what was the paper called? What was it?
It was something about pace of play. Pace of play may influence muscle fatigue. Journal of Sports Sciences. We could put up a link for anybody.
Yeah, we can put a link in the description.
Looking to get that one. So around that time, I was kind of looking for other ways to communicate science, and was really enjoying working in baseball. And particularly, my area of research was fatigue, and primarily in the forearm musculature. And I remember one day on Twitter, Kyle was talking about spin rate, and I sent him like this long question. Like it was a pretty long, couple paragraph question just about what muscle activation patterns were associated with, generating greater spin rate, thinking that he'd know it right away.
Yeah.
And then I remember him basically taking a screenshot of the email, or it was a Reddit message even, and posting it on Twitter and being like, this is how you ask a question. This is how you structure a question.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'd been writing about my stuff metric that I had created, and starting to take some of this, fatigue work and the fatigue units equation that I came up with, and that was starting to get a little bit more popularity, and all of those things really were made possible just by basically, I would say there was 3 people that were super, super helpful when it came to me getting into baseball writing. And one of them was Kyle. The other was Eno Saris, and then Joshua Howsam from Baseball Prospectus, Toronto up here. So all 3 of those guys were just incredibly helpful, incredibly supportive of me when I was trying to get into this. And, as an ergonomist, we're always looking at force, repetition, and posture when we're talking about injury. Yeah. And I had the force side of it with the stuff metric, the repetition stuff, and the workload stuff was the fatigue units. The biggest thing we were all missing at that point in time was just a really easy way to capture mechanical data. And that's kind of how this PitchAI story really started to come into fruition.
And really quickly, just to clarify for some of the listeners, so what do you mean by when you said stuff metric?
So I think the first blogging kind of series I did is I came up with a metric that was really just summing up movement and velocity profiles and turning them into, I got to say Z scores, because this is American, not Z scores.
Yeah.
But so the Z scores, and then you add them together, multiply a frequency modifier. And it was the best way to describe it. It was a metric that was one number that described the 3D space of how much time a batter had between the fastest pitch and the slowest pitch, and then a resultant distance that they had to cover. With the theory being that if you had better stuff, there was more movement, there was more disparity in velocity. That metric, I put that thing absolutely through the ringer in terms of validation and, blog posts and looking at it from injury perspectives. And
couple pivot tables, probably.
Couple. Oh my God. That was one of the first ones. I think I got that one up to about 200 megabytes, that pivot table. Yeah, so not quite the same as the fatigue units one, but it was up there for sure.
Yeah, I feel well, I was gonna say, I think my first interaction on a personal level outside of Twitter and just reading things that you've done was you actually calling, and we had like a Zoom call, and you gave us some advice on
Yeah, I remember that.
journal article writing.
Yeah,
and like the peer review process.
Yeah,
I think it was like 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, so like you guys had submit a few papers like to PeerJ, and I know one of them, the one got accepted. I think 2 or 3 of them got accepted, and then there was one that got rejected, and a couple of them went through like long review processes, but it had nothing to do with like the quality of the work you were doing. Yeah. Right? Like and that was it. It was just, I was like, I sent Kyle a message. I just said, you guys are doing awesome stuff. And the voice you're bringing to the table in terms of research is just so super important. But how can we maybe induce a few less headaches for yourself along the way? So yeah, I remember that Zoom call. I remember seeing OC's beard on there. Yeah,
it was actually a very, if I remember right, we all took it from one laptop. Like we all piled in behind Joe's desk.
You were.
It was from Joe's laptop.
Yeah, we all took it from Joe's desk, so we all like crammed in behind him.
Let's go.
Speaking of Bodie, he's in the chat right now. He just said that paper sucked. Let's be honest.
I'm not gonna say that.
I was gonna say I was on a bit of a losing streak because back then, now Lindley's kind of the head honcho when it comes to making sure, submitting research papers, organizing all of that. But at the time, it was me, and. Dude, I mean, I don't know if I was mailing it in or what, or I was on a down streak, but I think I was 0 for 3, or I started off like 3 for 4, and then I went on a 3-game losing streak, and I was like, rough.
That's still Hall of Fame numbers, though, man. That's still Hall of Fame average right there. Yeah. And okay, so maybe that paper wasn't like the highest quality thing you guys have ever done, but if I'm not mistaken, the first author was a high school student. Like, the level that was coming out of that's pretty crazy. Like, that was awesome.
Yeah. That was kind of like the first thing, and then that was at least the first thing that I remember. And then
was that in summer 18?
I want to say it was early 18. Might have been like really early 18. I feel like something like that.
Yeah,
I messed up on it.
Everything's a blur.
Yeah, there's a lot that's happened since then. So yeah, timelines are a little bit hazy.
Yeah, and then I remember.
And how did PitchAI get started, and when did you get involved with that?
Yeah, so back to the ergonomics world and coming up with this model where we wanted to understand the 3 components of injury and performance. Anthony's laughing, so I'm sure somebody's chirping in the chat there. So that's fun.
Bodie said Caravan wrote it up well, but it was unsalvageable. Wasn't his fault. It says this is Bodie's name on the paper.
So we were coming up with just like how do we capture like mechanics simply? And one of the ways that we do that in ergonomics is like some posture based tools where you get somebody working and then you look at a certain posture that they get into and you just do these little check boxes along the way. So it's like, okay, shoulder abduction is between here and here. Horizontal abduction is between here and here. Just bins, we always refer to them as. And you guys are, familiar with the buckets. It was very comparable to something like that. And there's stuff like the rapid upper limb assessment, or even, if you look for my most cited stuff, it's the rapid office strain assessment, which is like an office ergo assessment tool.
A good parallel for baseball, that's kind of similar to how the on-base U screen is, right? It's like pass-fail. If you're like within this range or past this range, then you like pass. If not, fail.
And we kind of do like not so much pass-fail, but like risk weighting. So it'd be like neutral is like 1, and then as you get further deviated from it, it's like it goes up by 2 to 3, something like that.
Okay.
And I had a master's student, Richard Burfer, who's now working with the Texas Rangers. And Richard's master's thesis was looking at scouts and coaches and how well they could complete basically a pitching version of that ergo posture assessment. Caravan, your hair is just magnificent. So what we did was we just looked at different postures in these different bins at foot strike. And that was kind of what we're thinking, like, okay, this can at least be a very simple way to get some sort of a standardized objective look at mechanics. Around the same time, we were working on something called PDAI, which is like physical demands analysis with AI. Okay. And it's you film somebody at work and you try and get how many times they get into a certain posture. And it's all computer vision.
I know that's what Anthony's been doing to me. I knew it. I knew the whole time he's been filming me at Driveline. I knew that was why.
Well, yeah. I mean, we got to make sure you stay safe. Yeah, we got to make sure you stay safe there. So I remember I was at like a men's league game or something like that and filmed somebody, throwing a pitch. And I was like, we might be able to use this. So the very first thing we did was we just tried to replicate Richard's thesis with, this PitchAI version 0.01.
Yep.
And what we did there was created a super simple app and then just tried to find the foot plant frame and then put the person into bins that they were throwing in.
That's awesome.
So that was kind of the inception of PitchAI. And the first thing we saw there was like, I think out of the 10 bins that we evaluated, the computer, I set up the code so it was a conditional statement. It would say Terminator win if it was better than the coaches. So how many times the machines would beat the man. And I think in the very first version, very little training of the model, like 1 on 8 of the bins. So we kind of said, I think we've got something here. And since then, it's really just been a matter of kind of, putting the pedal to the metal a little bit. I think the very first version of this was at the winter meetings where we would have met Anthony.
Yeah,
that's the first time. First time.
2018 or 2019?
No,
19. Yeah. So stuff has happened with PitchAI like pretty fast.
Yeah.
Like the first thing that we had that was actually public facing was like December of last year. And then we really kind of like ramped that up quite a bit. It got a lot more robust, and we had another version of it in March, right before COVID happened. I was in Phoenix for spring training, and met with a bunch of teams, bunch of people down there, and a lot of great feedback. But then obviously the world changed a lot, and then we really were kind of stuck for a little bit because there's no human data collection allowed in Canada right now. And then, to really kind of take that over, we had a very small data set we were working with for validation, but then, working with Anthony and you guys, that helped take it over the edge to kind of finish what we know as PitchAI version 1.0 that we're releasing now.
Yep. Yeah. And I remember specifically at winter meetings, I knew Sonne was really about biomechanics when the first thing he showed me was his Edward Muybridge tattoo, which is like that, like no one's gonna understand that except for super OG biomechanists who've actually like had to learn about that. But I saw the Muybridge tattoo and I was like, all right,
you can say nerds, man. That's fine. You can say giant nerds.
Like the most OG of OG biomechanists. And yeah, COVID kind of happened. We started to talk about internally at Driveline how we were going to allocate a lot of resources into online training, making that, as good as we can. I think before that kind of happened though, you'd already sent over something, like, hey, check this out. And I remember like we'd looked for it, we'd had some plans to do like some captures, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. Like we're going to go put more resources into online training, really develop that out. And I think I was like that day, I just called you up and I was like, hey, let's get this going. What can we do? Yeah. How can we help? We started to like eyeball, compare the mocap reports. I remember I was finding videos from people who had thrown, who'd had a recent mocap and was trying to like qualitatively see, like, okay, yeah, we could probably look at this signal, probably not going to be able to look at this one, that kind of a thing. Yeah. Then after, Arizona getting a bunch of paired data, that's when things like really started to look, really, really promising from like a validation and reliability standpoint. Yeah.
And a big part of that too is like, even we're experiencing some of it now, right? With some of the initial reports where people say, oh, this looks different, but it's really what it's coming down to is you've got two very different models. And in the initial phase of this, part of it is understanding where your strengths and your weaknesses are, but not necessarily weaknesses, but just changes in interpretation, right? We had defined joint angles at first in a very different way.
Right.
It was very much in a way that we were used to from an ergonomics and occupational biomech standpoint. So, we were saying, here's our angles, and you guys are going, whoa, what is this? I can see the shapes are very similar, or they're, 90 degrees off.
Yep.
But then we just started picking away at it and saying, metric by metric, how do we get it to speak Driveline-ese in those reports?
And by the way, what was your sample size like before we started looking at like paired mocap and or paired like Driveline Mocap Lab and PitchAI? How many collections have you guys had?
We had 10 pitchers, and ranging between like 2 and 5 pitches each. But the bigger issue there was that it was a very similar sample. They were all Ontario
like soft
University. Soft tossers by, the definition of what we got out of that Arizona data set. Some of that too, right? It was just, where they were throwing. It's the first time a lot of those guys have ever been in a biomechanics lab before. And I think our highest fastball velocity was like 85, and that one was an outlier. So
I think that was Lindley.
I saw that video.
I wish. Yeah. Yeah, I got that before the day we were supposed to talk about the PitchAI launch and everything. I was like, I'd message Scott, our social media guy. I was like, hey, am I allowed to put this out? I really want to get this video out. It's tight. Made me wait.
How big is the PitchAI team? I know, like, for people, well, for any listeners that aren't, don't work for Driveline, which is about 20% of our listeners. We have a few of you guys in our Basecamp message board, which Sonne is quickly learning how to dominate Basecamp. But like, what's the kind of the overall crew size wise and personnel?
Yeah, so we're a really small team. So it's myself. Probably the most important person on the team is our lead designer, Heather Moore. And Heather's got like a great UX background, and she's done some really incredible things for our team. The smartest guy on our team is Colin McKinnon, who's our VP of
Nathan's
AI
cousin.
and analytics.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Very
Colin's
closely related to Nathan McKinnon.
Yeah, exactly. I think he, if you were to ask some of his PhD classmates, I think Colin's a little bit of a dirtier hockey player than Nathan. Yeah, he's a former rugby guy, so I think some of that carries over onto the ice.
Oh, nice.
We've got another chief technology officer, Alex Kazuka, and then our CEO, Reed Hanoum. And then Brian Gills is helping us out a little bit on the business development side, but it's a pretty small team. We do have some outsourced development as well, and a great development shop here in Toronto that we've been working with a lot. And I know they've contributed a ton to the project, and especially getting new users on board in that as well.
Do you want to talk about because obviously it's like a key point and something that a lot of customers will use, and that'll be the first question they'll think of, the differences between PitchAI and our Mocap Lab, and like why there will be a difference in metrics, why some metrics are accessible only through Mocap Lab, and how to treat like the two different outputs.
Yeah,
this is really important.
Yeah.
We're clipping this out, so you better make this answer good. We're clipping this out.
Yeah, we've talked about this at length, especially just because, one of the first things that we said too was making it very apparent that when we go about the messaging with this isn't a replacement to the biomechanics lab. This isn't going to replace marker, motion capture, all of that. So it's huge. And as far as like, early on, I think I even went into it with like a comparison looking for accuracy to mocap and like validity. And it's very surprisingly good. And I was like very excited about that. But again, the real power and I think the usage of PitchAI, which we'll get into later, is from a like within pitcher reliability perspective. Like, throw to throw, there's going to be very, very strong reliability. So you can look for directional changes, and there's going to be a lot of power in.
Absolutely, there's a ton of power in that, and then I think there's the biggest power I think that PitchAI is going to bring to the table is that you can make biomechanics a part of your daily training. Like every bullpen you throw, you can get it. Every game, if you want to get some samples, you can get that. You guys have seen it too, and you guys are probably doing this better than anyone, and that's getting your participants to give close to a 100% effort in the lab, right? Like, you guys have had guys touching 100 out there already. So that has been, yeah, exactly. Rachel's absolutely killed that. And that's huge. Like, and that's huge from like a scientific community standpoint, right? Because how many pitchers have you talked to are just like, I was uncomfortable. I'm throwing in my underwear. You got to keep the lab relatively like air conditioned so that the sweat doesn't cause the markers to fly off. It's pretty unnatural. right?
yeah.
Like there's absolutely no hitter in there.
Plenty of times, like a guy is thrown, and you can tell he's just like 10 miles an hour under his ceiling, and it's just like it's all I got. I don't know. I'm gonna tell you.
I think that's what happened with me too.
I'm showing my chest hair. It's really tough to keep markers on my on body hair. That's the only reason I'm showing it during the.
You got to get the disposable razors and cut little patches in if you want the good stuff.
I think there's like this is like something I thought of a while ago when we were doing capture somewhere. It was like really warm, markers were falling off. I think there's also got to be some kind of like subconscious like mechanics manipulation when you know the markers are on and you want them to stay on, kind of a thing. Like I think we experienced this with a ton of like Latin players when we worked with them with teams, because like obviously there's a language barrier there, and they had to start to understand that if a marker came off, they had to keep throwing, right? And so like, in their mind they're like, okay, if I just throw and all the markers stay on, I'll be done here. And then we're kind of like wrapped kind of. So I feel like there's got to be some sort of like, definitely like difference in mechanics there, just from like, I don't want to be naked anymore. I don't want to be
I'm done with being
out
naked.
here throwing in my underwear with these people.
Said Alex Caravan, never.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that's kind of when we talk about like validity and reliability, right? Like a lot of the times we're referring to like marker to marker comparison, like how accurate is shoulder abduction or how accurate is internal rotation. But what sometimes gets lost, and like I was saying, you guys are doing a good job of it, this is not the standard across the board, is what are you capturing? Is that movement actually reflective of like a person's maximum effort? Yep. And I think that's one thing PitchAI allows us to do really, really well, right? Is you can get any throw. If you've got the camera on somebody, you can get somebody from the stands. Like I've got one of those Sony RX100 Mark VI cameras with a really nice zoom on it, and we were getting absolutely awesome quality video just going to spring training games. Yep. So from a scouting perspective, this is something I think that's going to be really revolutionary and really, really helpful. Yeah. But when we talk about like the differences, right? And we were talking about this in the base camp. PitchAI, we have 16 markers, and they're all joint centers. They're all estimated joint centers. In your marker-based system, you've got 43. Did I get that right, Kyle?
48.
48.
48. I was too high the first time too. Yeah. The second time. So there's certain things that are going to get captured differently. Like one of the ones that's probably like the best example is like internal rotation. So if you're measuring internal rotation, in a marker-based system, you've got markers that are like on the front, on the back, and you're actually capturing humeral rotation there, right?
Okay, showing off touch. I like it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sorry, I should have flexed a little bit more there too. But in PitchAI, internal external rotation is this, right? And it's joint center, joint center, joint center. Yeah. And what is that angle that gets formed there? So we will see some things along the way, and like, one of the things that we can do in the very short term future, and I think is something, even we can work on now, is we wanted to report what angles we were getting. And when we've done our validation, it's been taking C3D files and recreating our marker set in it. Yep. So that's been how we've done our validation. So it's truly like apples to apples, right? The next step of that, I think, is coming up with some transfer type functions that would take these data and put them on the same scales that we know from your normative ranges. Right. Because right now we're seeing differences in normative ranges. Like we see guys saying, this isn't 90 degrees, or he looks like he's at 90 degrees. That's just purely a factor of how things are getting defined from a joint perspective. And if you were to track that over time in PitchAI, you would see the same changes that you'd see in a marker-based system. But some of those magnitudes are going to be a little bit different, in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that's a good point. Definitely like a piece that I'm excited about is those kind of like transfer functions and things like that. But a lot of people have kind of asked initially with it coming out, what's good? What is good with biomechanics and the pitching motion, and what these numbers within PitchAI says. And like, as always with that question, especially with us, like it depends, like there's a lot that goes into it. And I think that, It's actually kind of weird that that's the question. And I feel like, you know, a lot of people have their idea of mechanics, how it works, that kind of a thing.
Mhm.
And all PitchAI is doing is giving them a way to actually measure that and see,
Yes.
you know, if they're right. And like people can use that for directional changes, good and bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna have our like model and system, which is not like a one size fits all system of, you know, everyone needs to be here at this point within this range, that kind of a thing.
Yep.
Ours is like a little bit, you know, more individual just because of the data set that we've already had. And we're going to try to adapt that and then build it into the data that we get from PitchAI to help people with like good, what's bad. But I think a lot of it is going to come down to, you know, people getting a better understanding for, you know, basic like anatomical measurements, right? Like pitching coaches say stuff all the time, like,
Yeah.
to get more extension, plant harder, you know, on your front leg, that kind of things. There are like anatomical and physiological ways to like just say what that is. And PitchAI measures that. So if you have a theory of mechanics, if you think everyone's, you know, pelvis should be open at foot plant, if you think their torso should be closed at foot plant, that kind of a thing, like PitchAI is a tool that now you can quantify and measure that and kind of like see what's going on objectively. But then, yeah, eventually we are going to have those transformative functions, get a better idea of how the signal maps to what we have, and be able to say like good, bad, you know, you should go this way, go that way, that kind of a thing. And that's what I'm really excited for.
Yeah. Just to even go back to the reason like why this started emerging, right? And looking at that pitching mechanics tool, the manual coaching one, it was really to come up with an objective way of saying, you know, these are good mechanics, these are bad mechanics. And I've been, you know, very, very focused with PitchAI since the very start of saying, I don't want to tell you good or bad.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's not the point of this. And you guys know this better than anybody. Like there are no absolutes in biomechanics.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like when it comes to understanding pitching mechanics, there are no absolutes. There's no, if you get into this position, you're going to be hurt. The only thing you can say that you're going to get hurt for sure is if you pull down a kettlebell. You are going to get hurt pulling down kettlebells. There are no exceptions to that rule. And Joe. Let's not forget Joe. So the idea of this is even coming back to, you know, you see these warring factions of pitching Twitter and that sort of thing. We're just giving you something to measure now, right? Like this is just a tool for you to measure. If you want to go out and say this causes this and this causes this, measure it. Like it's the same thing with analytics, like across the board. All biomechanics is trying to put a number to a phenomenon so that you can say this happened here and this is how much it happened.
Yep.
Like it's not much crazier than that.
You're eliminating like the guesswork and just like the eyeballing it. Actually, Jason Hirsch from Fast Arm Care is in the chat. He just threw something in there pertaining to what we're talking about right now. So he said, in the report at the bottom are averages. I know it's dependent on many variables, but would love to know if there is a threshold for damn good and needs work for certain measurements. And this is a really good way to look at it. And so it's tough to say. I think that like initially you're going to be looking at all of the metrics and you might just think like all of the metrics matter, like up to a certain level. And maybe you're thinking of it in terms of like more is better or less is better kind of a thing. And that's what's really, really tough with like biomechanics. Like to give some tangible examples within the report, like shoulder abduction, for example. Typically, elite throwers that throw hard, you know, that we've seen in our data set, it's not like more is better, less is better kind of a thing. But typically, if it's like very smooth, if it's not an erratic, you know, movement of abduction, the shoulder abduction is going to be in this plane right here if I'm like moving my arm up and down. So ideally, if the arm is going to rotate around the torso, I don't want it to have unnecessary up and down movement. That's just like wasted energy, unless maybe it's like in the correct plane. So that's like an example of one where, you know, there are athletes that create scap retraction at 70 degrees of shoulder abduction. They can do that. There are some that create scap retraction at 100 degrees of shoulder abduction. A lot of it's going to depend on like what they can do and how they're creating it. So markers like that, like shoulder abduction, there isn't really like a necessarily good or bad. It's one of those metrics that it kind of just needs to be in a range that works for you. Now, other ones that are like very important, that where we see like high correlations with velocity, going to be like shoulder horizontal abduction max. That's ability to create scap retraction in this plane. We see, you know, the hardest throwers, they're creating, you know, at minimum 30 to 40 degrees of that, sometimes like 60 to 70. Elbow flexion maximum is another big one. Very, very rare that we see someone come in that doesn't get inside of 90 at some point in their, like, you know, in the way that their arm deploys. If they're able to keep their arm outside 90 the whole time, they would be like a very big outlier in our data set. That's another one where typically, you know, more is better. There's probably a threshold on that high end where it gets out of hand. And then another couple ones would be like hip shoulder separation, creating a large amount of that. But hip shoulder separation is kind of tough because timing is a big piece of that. But in general, metrics that you could have confidence in where, like, you know, this is just too low and like more is better, we need more. Arm internal rotation speed is the highest correlate with fastball velocity, and that just makes sense because that's how fast your arm is internally rotating at release. So basically, like, if you're, you know, I think in PitchAI, it seems to be scaled down a bit. I want to say the Pearson report is still like 3,000, 3,500. Typically in our lab, good/average is about 4,000 to 4,200. You know, above average, really good, you're getting close to 5,000. So arm internal rotation speed is going to be one where you're going to want it up.
How you were demonstrating that there though too, Anthony, you were going like this and then kind of rotating, right?
Yep.
Like, right? And like I was saying, this is how we were interpreting internal rotation there, because there's no pronation in PitchAI right now. Yep. So that's why you're going to see some of those differences. And part of what we're going to be doing with like the mobile app release is when you get a number, we're going to show you where you sit from 5th to 95th percentile, just to give you that context a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's off of everyone. That's taking a PitchAI capture. Is that the whole database?
That will be it for right now. And then as we build that out and we have like ages in there, then we can start breaking down by skill level, by age, those types of things. I mean, the thing that gets me the most excited is I think combined with like the stuff we've done internally and the track launch, like we're up to over 1,000 reports that we've generated, right? Which is just like crazy. Like it's big data for biomechanics, which you know, that's something that wasn't that easy to get years ago. Yeah, there he is. There he is.
It is, yeah.
That's big data.
And I think another thing we've kind of like touched on this a bit too, in talking about like the validity and reliability and the differences in the Mocap Lab and those kind of adjustments. And to, you know, circle back still to what Hirsch was asking about, we just don't know yet with PitchAI, right? I think there's some that we do know, but we're still trying to understand the normative range. It's kind of like a new tool, you know. We don't know exactly how the signal completely like overlaps with what we know and what we've built, kind of like our models of good and bad around. And I know that was like an initial thing as far as like feedback and questions when we deployed it to the floor. A lot of people were like, a lot of our trainers looked at the reports and they were like, oh, this looks really high. This looks really low compared to his Mocap report. And it's just kind of like, we're also learning, okay, how are they slightly different? You know, because there are going to be some times with the way that, like, you know, PitchAI is measuring things, there are just going to be some things that are going to be hard to measure at certain points in the throw. And I think we both know that. And that's one of the pieces where, like, 12 camera, you know, Mocap Lab with a full marker set is going to do a better job in that instance. But for, you know, compared to your pitching coach standing on the side of the mound and just eyeballing your mechanics in the bullpen, like, this is, you know, incredibly a huge upgrade, right? It's objective. We're quantifying it. You know, there's no like BS. The pitching coach can't just like eyeball something and be like, you see, you're tilted too far there. You rotated open too early. It's like, okay, well, did I?
Yeah,
I mean, we could video both those throws and we could get a number right now to see if
exactly.
If you got Carter Caps trying to rip 105 mile an hour gray ball, you can just sit there and get biomechanics on it all day, baby.
Exactly. Yeah. And just tell them like, you did this, you know, like, okay, here's how this changed. And that's another thing too. And like, I want to talk about that so much in terms of like how people should use it. If you can like understand just like basic anatomical measurements, like if you understand elbow flexion, this is 90, going out is or going in makes it higher, straight out is 0, that kind of a thing. There is so much opportunity and things that we still don't know about pitching mechanics that you can now do with PitchAI on like a test, retest, automatic like feedback cycle, right? My favorite thing in throwing when like I was training a Driveline was just like trying a new cue, or like someone said something to me, like Rob Hill would just like come up and be like, oh, you need to do this. And then if the radar gun went up, it was like, okay, that's pretty good. Let's like do that again. Same thing with PitchAI now, right?
I'll give you like a quick like sneak peek into like the mobile app that's coming soon. But like you can get any 2 reports, and then you basically just move the slider, and you can see like how the 2 skeletons kind of change.
Yo, shift up a little bit closer to camera. You're getting a bunch of light refracting on it.
Oh, okay. This is big.
Oh, that's tight.
Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, you got two throws you're doing there.
Yep.
One of the things you could do is exactly what you just said. One of them was 95, the other was 92.
Yep.
Well, what happened in the 95 that was so much different than the 92?
Exactly. Yeah.
Same stuff you guys were doing with pitch design, right? It was like, okay, I did this, and now because I got Rapsodo, I can say, okay, this is what happened to it. And then you test and you retest and you test and you retest again, right? So those types of things I think are really the most exciting application. And like, was it Zach Moraine? He had that tweet thread on the weekend where he was talking about his, you know, he's having fly out early, and then he worked on that cue, and then he showed that it changed. Like that's exactly how I think PitchAI should be used. And, you know, coming back to the fatigue stuff, you know, there's one of Fleisig's big papers was the one that showed that pitchers who throw while they are fatigued are, you know, 6 times higher, like a 6-time elevated risk of having an injury.
Right.
And Richard and Mike Holmes and we published a paper last year in PureJ on the kinematic changes that occur. It was like a systematic review on kinematic changes that occur during fatigue. It's so much more important, I think, from a biomechanics standpoint, to see how you change than it is to be like, how do mine compare against this person's? Because what one person does might be totally different, because, you know, if you look at line of action and how muscles attach to the bone, all these things, there's so much variability, and there's so much anatomical variance between any 2 people, right? Like the example we always give, you would not want Marcus Stroman to throw like Nate Pearson.
Right. Yep.
And you would not want Nate Pearson to throw like Marcus Stroman, right? Like their body types are so different, and person to person, it's tough to say like you need to do this. Yep. But, you know, if you see somebody and they're having significant changes throughout the season, that might be your flag to say, okay, you're getting fatigued. It's time to maybe take a little bit of a closer look at your workload, whatever that might be.
Yep. And there were so many times, like in my, you know, like I think it's just like really, really common after like a couple bad outings or something to kind of like feel lost. And that's when, you know, players that actually, it's almost like a bad thing, they get too coachable in that instance, because they're looking and trying to figure out like what went wrong, you know, what's changed. I like players just already look at video of themselves like all the time, trying to figure out like, what was I doing? You know, like I remember like a bunch of like teammates that like when they were in a slump, they would go back to a specific swing where they hit a home run. They're just like, I'm not doing that anymore. You know, whatever it was.
But you're not measuring that. Right? Yeah.
And so I think that's another great usage. I think, you know, PitchAI, you take a bunch of captures at the beginning of the season or when things are going really good. And if things feel off, lose command, velocity's going down, you're hurting, something like that, you now have like a starting point or kind of like a checkpoint back to see like, okay, mechanically, what actually is changing besides, you know, your coach just kind of like spitballing some, you know, coachism at you, and then now you're just in the Superdome for the rest of the day.
And by the way, Brady, I think I was there when one of your teammates, shout out Tony Henriksen, was doing that, dude. I remember sitting at Matador with you guys, and he's just watching on his phone. It's like, look at that home run, man. My it's good.
Yeah, just no, it's actually so common, and so, you know, if you already have the video and stuff, now you have an ability to like actually have some numbers, you know, like you're just looking at that video and you're like, man, what was I doing back then? And now you can actually, tap into that. Real quick, Hirsch asked another follow-up question. I think this is good because he said, kind of what we were talking about, like, throw-to-throw analysis, cues, that kind of a thing. He was saying the current PitchAI analysis is up to 30 minutes for kind of like the return. Will that be reduced in the future? I'm assuming this is being automated. Maybe I'm wrong there.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
That's going to get much faster, and I even think that's like that might be just like a bit of a hiccup in the system there too. I think when we were looking, Max was running numbers, right? It was between minimum 5, like getting up to like 15 to 20 in that range.
Yeah.
So that will come down for sure. And there's a few things you can do to help improve the speed. If you've got a bunch of people in the background, it basically analyzes them all and then says who was throwing a pitch, right? And we'll make that more efficient. One of the other things, we've talked about is getting rid of the PDF report in the future.
Yep.
Right. So what happens is now the video goes up, it gets analyzed, and then we render a PDF report by like parsing out frames of the video. And that takes a little bit of time there. And that's all automatic as well. That's going to get shorter because we're just going to pass the data stream we would have parsed and then be able to just show that on the screen.
Yep.
So that's going to speed up the process too. I mean, this is like we said, this is week 1 of, a small team working with a slightly bigger team.
Yeah.
It's just going to do this for speed after this point in time. And,
So what's the output going to be then? Is it going to be still in PDF format, or is it going to be like an interactive visual?
It could be that interactive visual. Yeah.
It depends on what we do with track. Yeah. I mean, we can
exactly.
kind of like leverage it how we want. So
exactly.
A lot of directions.
Yeah.
Also, one thing that occurred to me that I think is really exciting that I hadn't thought of previously, but now that you mentioned there's 1,000 videos, I think like a really cool thing when a new technology comes out and a new set of measurements is the kind of open source research community. Because like initially when, TrackMan, Rapsodo, all these tracking technologies came out, stuff like spin axis was like not really taken into consideration because everyone's like, spin axis, I don't know what that means. I know what vertical break means. I know what drop means, and then like over time, people started doing all these studies, blog posts, their own independent research projects, like showing the value of spin axis, how that changing that. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of open source stuff we get with PitchAI as well. Like once people start like collecting mass data, longitudinal data, like you said, since the intra-person reliability is so high, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's part of what we're going to be doing with like the mobile experience is, you can look at all of our reports and that, but you can also download the CSV and just boom, download your CSV, get your entire time history of all these different metrics, and start running your own analyses, which I think is really exciting.
How many frames is CSV?
It's always 1,000. It's always 1,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the iPhone captures at 240 in slow-mo. Yeah. Same as our lab, but then PitchAI rubber bands it out to 1,000 data points.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Coming from the research side of R&D, I'm really excited. We've talked about the struggles of data collection in the past, and longitudinal data collection in specific is really tough. So it's going to be really, I feel like there's a really good opportunity here to collect that data because it's just less invasive. So like, even if the fidelity or the depth of the data points it's not as deep as like what the 3D motion capture would give us. There's much more potential for longitudinal data sets, which are like arguably more important. So it won't take us 2 years to finish a like a biomechanics study or whatever.
And the thing with that, right, is like, it's not like saying like, oh, I use PitchAI, so I don't need to use a lab, and I've got a lab report, so I don't need PitchAI. Like it's definitely not like that. The best way that we always describe this in like ergo interventions is, how do I get the most data the fastest? And we're working on a study right now with a major league team where they've got a few guys rehabbing from Tommy John, and we're monitoring their progression. Right. And we might learn some things from that it's like, okay, this is something that happens on the rehab process. Now let's try and understand that phenomena in greater detail. So now it's just focused in your research question a little bit more for when you go into the lab. So those types of things are like, super exciting. It could just be that way of going, okay, this is what we can capture. Now, when we need to get in there and really look at something very granular and that sub-millimeter accuracy is important, you refer and inform your research question on the lab front.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. There's a ton of like, if a trainer thinks he has like a cue or a drill
Yep.
that he thinks is the answer, now you can find out, like take a couple of videos, throw the cue at the player, implement the drill, look for the change, especially if it's like a metric that, and that's another thing too, like even though the data, as far like the data set is a little smaller in terms of what we get from PitchAI.
The columns,
As far as what matters though, we've almost got them all in terms of like, in the past, like, I mean, trust me, Caravan has given me thousands of pages of PDFs of data from our Mocap Lab. And there's probably been like, 10 pages of useful stuff in there where it's all like, okay, this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. This doesn't matter. And so like because of all of that, sifting through that data set, we have an idea of like what does matter, what's really important. And PitchAI across the board can like measure all of those outside of like, kinetics and estimating like MOIs.
We're working on the kinetic stuff.
Yeah.
I was just gonna ask because you mentioned rehab or like using it as a rehab monitor, and that's something that we've done in the past with Modus. And Modus obviously gives us an estimate of elbow kinetics and among other things. I know we've talked about it in the past, but do you think that those two things could work together to like be a good rehab or just a good like complete workload monitor in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Like really excited to see how Modus and PitchAI can help work together in the future. One of the things that I think it could improve is when you were talking about the internal rotation velocity, right? Like there might be some stuff that we can get out of that helps there. But I also think, there's one of the ways that Modus was used in recent years that I thought was like super exciting was being able to kind of calibrate to the pitch of X data or the TrackMan data, and being able to get predictions of elbow torque and workload from those data because you had calibrated it to the Modus in the past. And I do see those two things like working together and creating like almost like basically a full service biomechanics lab that costs like your cell phone. This is like $150 Android phone I got off of Amazon, and you pair that with a Modus and you've got basically a full service biomechanics lab that you can take to any practice, any game.
Yeah, the future directions are like really exciting. And actually, this is a really good segue. And Hirsch just asked actually in the chat, is PitchAI only for pitching? Sorry, this is covered earlier. And so like to get into kind of like where are we planning on going outside of the pitching stuff, hitting AI definitely in the it's in the works. It's in the works.
Yeah, we're hoping that one's
too much or say anything.
Yeah,
but stay tuned. There'll be some stuff soon.
Yeah, now that you found the dongle again, Brady, we can get back on that.
Yeah. Found the dongle and clean the files.
I had a question for like camera wise. Did you guys start with an iPhone, or did you guys start with like a higher, like a more expensive camera with higher frame rates or something? Did you like what was the initial kind of training data in terms of camera and video quality?
Yeah, so our first pass was with a camera that ended up being less quality than the iPhone camera. So it was like one of the built-in, I believe it was the Vicon cameras that kind of sync with the system so that we could have perfect frame-to-frame capture. But in terms of whether it was our calibration problems or the, there was a bit of a distortion, like a bit of a fisheye on it. The video quality itself was not as good as the stuff that we got off the iPhone. Now, since what we've been finding is that people have sent us Edgertronic video, 1,000 frames per second, higher.
Yeah.
We get diminishing returns after 240, where the processing time starts to climb, gets longer and longer to process. The accuracy really does not change very much after 240 frames per second. So the only thing I would say that is of real benefit with that Edgertronic, and I'm going to screw up this name, but it's the way that the shutter captures, right? Like it's like the entire frame at once with the Edgertronic, so there's no distortion. That does seem to like clean things up a little bit, but even then, not too much that you would be able to discern a real difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's better for the 2D. It's better for the 2D. So that's one thing. And just to note, sorry, cutting you off. There's basically two models in PitchAI. And one of the models is used because it's a nice, smooth, easy to graph model, and it's the 2D stuff. So that's what that skeleton is that you see in those videos. And every now and then you'll get a little bit of a glitch where maybe the legs switch, but there's no inverse. Yeah, little dancing legs, but there's no inverse kinematics model in that 2D model that we use for the overlay. So that overlay was meant to just kind of be like a quick, like, okay, I want to look at my kinematic sequencing. How do I get this in here? The model that's used to graph out all those charts in the PDF report is the 3D model with an inverse kinematics model in it. So even if you see the dancing legs, that's not going to be reflected in the actual report in that data itself.
Yeah. And just to hit on a couple other things too, as far as like things coming. Hirsch was asking about, we mentioned hitting, but I think there could be potential for, maybe other movements, areas where we collect data, movement screens, that kind of thing.
Movement screens, all those things.
Possibility, direction there. And also, one exciting thing that I think, Sonne, you're kind of getting into with the models and that kind of stuff is right now when you get the video back, it's just like the overlay. But, in the future, maybe you'll be able to get top view, a front view, different angles, So even though you take a video from the side, after PitchAI processes that, you'll then be able to see and like watch the like kinematics and that model move from an overhead view, from a bird's eye view, front, back, whichever angle you want to see, those kind of things.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know we kind of touched briefly on it, but I was going to mention maybe looping back, especially if maybe more people are watching, discussing like the validation of PitchAI and Mocap. Like we mentioned pairing data, having a bunch of people run through Mocap as PitchAI captures are getting taken, and how we have much higher, like we have like very high correlation of values, even when there is a little bit of a magnitude difference. So for some people that might be confusing in terms of like the raw number being like having like an absolute error, like a gap, but like the variation being very very consistent and very high across like a number of metrics. And speaking personally, I know Sonne gave me a huge Excel workbook a month or so ago that
was
had
a beautiful pivot table, if I must say so myself. One of my finer pivot tables.
Yeah, immediately crashed my laptop, so I couldn't validate PitchAI myself. So this is me going on air and saying PitchAI is impossible to validate because Excel workbooks are too big. Now I recreated I recreated a bunch of stuff in Python and matched up with Sonne's pivot table wizardry. But yeah, like consistently improving correlations as well as we get more and more data.
Yeah.
So do you know, I guess, like I asked you the initial sample size, but do you know like what we're at right now in terms of paired N? I know we have the Arizona data set, but like overall Mocap and mode.
We're over 100 now, I believe.
100.
Over 100. Yeah. So we're like, that's like 150-ish then with what we had already. And then we've got some more too. So one of the things that we did when we like trained the model, how we got like some of our initial like accuracy numbers is we would train on like 70% of the data and then test on 30% of the data. But then after that, we like kept going and kept like pushing the validation because we wanted to get the best model out of it, right? So kept adding things back in. We do have ethics clearance to write up a paper on the validation. And it is one of the things that we're going to do in the future is basically take like an untainted data set and process that, right? Like one that has never seen PitchAI's training models. And that's what we'll publish our work on so that you really get the accurate one in terms of that model. I know like if we were going to be like working on that validation even further, we want to get some more arm slots in there. We need to get some more like submarine and sidearm type ones. Because I think horizontal abduction gets a little bit thrown off by some of them sometimes, primarily just it makes like the forearm get really short in some cases. But that has been
big for me. Big on that.
Yeah. Well, you and Hackamer, we got to make sure we take care of Tom. So Yeah, no, it's definitely on the validation front. I don't think there's anybody that's going to be tougher on it than like our group internally. Then maybe Caravan, like very very close second.
Wait for
there.
Dan. I don't know. Dan might come in.
Do it. Yeah, come on. Hit us with your worst though. But I mean, that's like at the end of the day, right? If you look at our team, we're scientists first that got into baseball second. And, you know, we push the envelope pretty hard with what it comes to in terms of validating. And, you know, we had some meetings very early on where people were kind of like, wow, that was very different than any meeting I've ever had before. You guys were just so much more honest than anyone we've ever talked to. Yeah. So we're always, you know, we want to find the flaws, because if we can find the flaws, then that's the fun part. We can attack and really try and make it even better.
Yeah, you can just keep improving.
Yeah.
I was going to mention, I know there's been a couple that we've talked about internally, and a couple that we've already heard back from already existing clients, but is there kind of a short list of potential bugs or just like things we're looking to clean up right now that people might run into? Like, I know one of them is if there's stuff in the background, they might pick up like that motion instead of the pitcher's motion. So kind of like best practices to avoid any low hanging bugs.
Yeah. Like one of the things that I would see like is if you've got a bunch of people wearing white pants and they're like 5 feet behind the pitcher who's also wearing white pants, that can sometimes make it difficult for like the legs to get matched up. You know, your best possible capture is the pitcher is the biggest person in the frame by far. You get that good slow-mo. You make sure that you pick their leg kick up all the way past ball release. That is going to result in your best capture. One of the things that can happen with slow-mo on like iPhone is if you cut that filming off too soon, and I've seen this with a couple track uploads, what happens is it goes like fast at the start and then slow in the middle and then fast at the end. But we're assuming that it's a consistent 240 frames per second throughout the entire video because it goes to 30 at the end. So make sure that if you go into your gallery view with the slow-mo, you can adjust those sliders. Make sure that it's all like the big wide dashes. That's going to result in a more consistent capture as well. So in terms of like best practices, you know, I've seen a lot that have turned out really well. The ones that haven't turned out well are the ones, maybe it's like a really dark space, or maybe the person's wearing all black and the wall behind them is black as well. There's not a lot of contrast. I've been able to kind of play around with some of that and like, you know, post-processing and work on contrast and highlights. That works. If you film a video and you're like, this looks really good, I can really see the picture and I can, you know, this is a good video, I can really see what's going on. The computers are going to say the same thing. So it does pass the eye test.
Good quality, yeah. It's actually relevant to what someone just asked in the chat. Miles Agamotto asked, what kinds of considerations would there be comparing PitchAI data between different frame rates, resolutions, camera angles, etc.? And this is actually something you already wrote about in one of the original blogs. So we can link that in the description of this video, but I believe it's on the ProPlay AI website.
Yes. So if you go to our website, click on like news, there's a few blog posts and there's two kind of validation blogs. One's called PitchAI Goes to Spring Training. And then the other is What Are We Capturing with PitchAI? And the spring training one, I did some brief studies where like I filmed somebody right at third base, then move 10 feet. Move 10 feet, move 10 feet down to see how much like that parallax effect would hurt. And, you know, the numbers were very consistent there. Also, you know, filmed like some of like Sunny Gray down at like the lowest level and then went up to the upper deck and filmed them from there. And you know, that threw off some of the pelvis rotation measures, but not by a lot. Like I think there's one of them, it was like 3 and 3, and one of the trials from up top was just significantly different than the rest. So that parallax effect, what we found is if you're within 30 degrees of forward, backward, up and down, you're going to get very comparable.
How many degrees with that? I don't know if it cut out, but I lost it.
Oh, 30.
Okay.
30. Yeah, you got like that 30 degree kind of zone that you can film within.
Yeah. So I thought that was great with the original angles. As far as cameras, differences in camera, I don't think there would be any, like, again, if the image is nice and it's just like an MP4 at a at a good frame rate.
What we found that like if you upload it to the system and it maintains its like native frame rate in there, like that's the other thing that iPhones do is if you pick from the gallery, it just flattens it to 30 frames per second. And like we created an algorithm to be like, if it reads back as 30 frames per second, but it's like 10 seconds long, like chances are that's 240 frames per second. And we process it as 240 frames per second. If you can upload the videos and keep their frame rate, which is usually done through like your desktop as opposed to like a mobile, it will pick up those frame rates and run them accordingly. What we found with our own internal testing is 30 frames per second. It's not enough resolution. The arm gets too blurry because it's moving so fast. 60 is not that much better. 120 is kind of our floor. And for people who have that like RX100 Mark VI camera, you can film at 120 and it will play back at 120. I know that camera will also do like 900, but it plays back at like 30 or something like that.
You need the high playback rate.
Exactly. Yeah, you can do 120 on there, and that's what we did all of our stuff from spring training with.
Yeah. All right, couple other things. First, Hirsch just roasted Caravan. Said, was it the Excel spreadsheet or the 8,000 tabs you have open that crashed your computer?
Ooh.
Very relevant.
Why can't I have both, man? I want the flexibility of opening up an Excel workbook and keeping all my tabs.
Yeah. Spencer said that Caravan looks good today, and he's a fan, which...
is that just like a bot?
Thanks,
Does a bot just play that every week?
Yeah,
He paid him.
But then he also asked, will the main impact in the near term come in improved top-line performance for those using it or in injury prevention? Well, obviously both to an extent, but which one more so than the other? I have some thoughts, but I'm interested in you guys's.
I would say like injury prevention is likely the longer term goal, other than monitoring, like fatigue monitoring. I think that's something that could happen very soon.
Yeah, I'm down to go on record right now and say that PitchAI is not going to solve pitching injuries in the near term. Anytime soon. We've talked a bunch on the podcast before too about like the issues with injury prevention modeling, injury prediction, that kind of stuff. And I do think there might be like one of the issues and gripes with like injury prevention and that type of modeling being so hard is it's so hard to do longitudinal stuff because you just like, okay, you don't know who's going to get hurt. You're just constantly like, trying to recapture people, maybe only get a couple guys hurt. That's not a big enough sample size to like glean anything from. But with PitchAI, now that it's, inside track and track has, wellness questionnaires and we collect, we're able to collect and log injury data if someone has to adjust their programming based on their elbow hurting, their shoulder hurting, that kind of a thing. That data now exists, and if you're constantly uploading video slow-mo videos into track, whether you have them ran on PitchAI or not, we can do it. We can backlog that, run them in the past retroactively if someone gets injured. Now we have an opportunity for that kind of like longitudinal post hoc analysis data set, looking at injury prediction. So I'm still pretty bearish on it, but maybe.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. Like the long term tracking of this, I think is going to be awesome. At the end of the day though, right? Like when it comes to injury prediction, anybody that tells you they can predict injury from mechanics, like fire that person into the sun.
Yeah.
This is good. Like that person is a shyster, a snake oil salesman, a scumbag.
It's got to be the first time shyster's ever been used on the podcast.
A toolbox, bag of hammers. Like this person is a jerk. That's the best way to describe it. Yeah. If you are saying mechanics without any sort of inference on workload as well, and like I said, it's velocity, it's workload, and it's mechanics. And those three things work together. And there is, like it's an unnatural motion of the body. Like there's some inherent risk in there, but there are things you can do to try and make sure that you get high performance while staying healthy. But, if you want to make sure you're guaranteed that you're never going to have any sort of an injury, that couch behind you, Brady, looks like a nice place to sit.
Just don't throw. That'll solve all your injuries.
Yeah,
that's good.
Can't get nerve entanglement if you don't throw, right, Caravan?
Dude, barely. You can get it from soft tossing though. I can definitely get nerve entanglement from soft tossing on Alki Beach.
Yeah.
You can get hair entanglement if you don't use that Pantene Pro V there.
Oh shit!
Jeez.
Yeah,
Jeez.
it's
take
that's
some notes from
compliment.
Mike. Caravan,
that is beautiful.
Look how good Mike's hair looks.
Dude,
You can tell that the man combs it.
Dude, I'm using Dove soap on this too. I don't even use shampoo, man.
Wow.
Let's get a bar of
And
soap.
it shows.
Mine's a lot more gray than Caravan's, though.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's about everything that was asked in the chat. Was there anything else, common stuff or things that we wanted to go over with PitchAI? You guys had? I have the Pearson report. I could screen share and we could walk through it.
Yeah.
I think that'd be fine.
Let's do that.
Is the screen sharing gonna jank up the overlays?
No, it
Or
should
no,
be
you're
fine.
good.
Do you want to just give me screen sharing privileges? Host, Mr. Driveline Baseball.
As the
I don't know,
primary
bro.
host.
Throw to you.
So, hope you guys can see.
Boom.
Yep.
Should be up now. So yeah, got a report pulled up. Yeah, this is the Pearson one. The report. I think there may be a more recent iteration of this, and this is the one in Basecamp. I don't know if it has.
Okay. Scroll all the way to the bottom and we'll tell you.
Yeah, it doesn't have the appendix, so it's
Okay. Yeah.
almost
So
the
this
most
is
recent.
Yeah.
So this is an example of PitchAI report. Actually, I think I have the video as well. Slide over.
Does the new iteration give you a date on the report?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure if it does or not.
That is. Let me check that out. Don't think so. It
Dude, that's what
be.
they're paying you big bucks for.
Yeah, this is good. We
features.
should include date. I know that might be somewhere in the.
This is live user experience design happening right before our eyes. Okay, we'll put date on there.
Yeah,
user interface, baby. I'm an expert
date on
now.
There. Yeah.
So, yeah, if you already have PitchAI and have used it inside Track, if you already signed up and have dropped a video in there, this is the same exact report, not the same exact. Older version. There's a slightly updated one with an appendix at the very bottom. Is actually where Hirsch was referencing before, with kind of like descriptions of the metrics, how they work, normative ranges, that kind of a thing. So, but as far as what you get, the first page, it's just going to be screen grabs from the video at lead leg lift, foot plant, max external rotation, and ball release. So very common events in the throws where still frame pictures are used to quantify mechanics on Twitter commonly. So use those to your advantage now in arguing your points. From there, we have the arm action kinematics. So basically just like the primary ones of elbow flexion, external rotation, abduction, horizontal abduction. A lot of this is just mirrored off of the biomechanics report that we already make and provide with our Mocap Lab. I just sent it to Sonne, and we kind of just tried to make them the same, copy paste them.
That was super genius. Colin Nathan McKinnon.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So as far as, again, and this is where I think that, it gets tough and a lot of people have questions, is what's good, what's bad? There are some normative ranges in this signal. We've released, threads in a couple blogs in the past looking at metrics and kind of what is good, what is bad, that kind of a thing. Not even that, but just what are normative ranges of what elite throwers are doing? And one thing we do in our biomechanics report that hopefully we'll eventually be able to get into with PitchAI as well is on the second page of the arm action kinematics, where you have each signal independently, what we do on this page is we take the kind of like average of our elite throwing data set and we map it as a normative range, as like a shaded region, so you can see where you lie in and how you compare where that signal lies.
I thought that was like you guys captured 5 pitches and that was your standard deviation. That's good.
No, it's our elite.
Okay,
That's
we can do
the-
that.
By the way,
That's
There's
the upper
both.
velocity data set. So yeah, on the first one, it's individual, where it shows the average of your throws and the standard deviation. And then the next page is normative ranges of the elite throwers, which is a way easier representation for an athlete to see like, oh, okay, my elbow flexion isn't high enough. I'm not getting enough shoulder horizontal abduction, that kind of thing. So,
but by the way,
yep, go ahead.
But by the way, like one thing maybe we should point out for viewers, especially ones that aren't super familiar with overall, biomechanics and pitching and just like movement cycles, when like explaining the normalization, foot plant at 0, ball release at 100, and then giving some perspective on the max external rotation.
Yeah, so you're saying like what is the pitching cycle?
Yeah,
or?
why it's important, because it's something we talked about internally quite a bit.
Mhm.
Like why it's important to normalize to the pitching cycle, capturing 0 at foot plant, 100 at ball release.
Yeah.
And just why like max external rotation is like another important metric and where that would usually lie.
Yeah, so it just helps with actually if I go down to the sequencing graph, I think it'll help lay it out because it's a little bigger. So setting 0 at foot plant and that kind of like being the start point of the throw and then going to ball release as 100% is important in normalizing that to a percentage, because now we can identify events and metrics within the pitching cycle and compare them across people. In the past, we've also tried to look at like the time between events, but that's very variable if your pitching cycle is longer or shorter. So treating it as a percentage and having that kind of like defined, events really helps us basically compare across pitchers and like perform research. Lindley can go in and answer like research requests and questions with things like that. So like having those definitions of events and the pitching cycle is what allows us to do that in there. Did that answer it, Caravan?
Absolutely.
I mean, if you didn't answer, pop it in the chat.
Yeah.
Brady repeat himself.
Yeah. So that's why I had the pitching cycle. Foot plant is 0.
It's also less very like the events that we can like standardize between people. We standardize them because they like seem to be pretty consistent. Like
the frames.
But
Everyone
between
does that.
foot plant. But yeah, everybody plants their front foot. Everybody releases a ball, and the like how people move between those two events are like they're consistent enough where we can basically, or we think we can validly compare them.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, like that's also why we went with the entire rubber banding approach for the data, so that you would always get the same data format each time. And that allows you to make really easy graphs like this in the future.
Urge just brought up 2 really good points. Maybe throw a box on each page for normative ranges or just a legend of averages. And that's definitely something. Once we have more data, which apparently 1,000 reports in the first few days, the more and more we can build out that average, get a better idea internally of what that kind of signal looks like. We'll be able to map that on here a lot easier. So after the arm angle kinematics and the angles up here, we have arm angular velocities. Primary ones here that we typically look at are elbow extension velocity and internal rotation velocity, looking for how fast extending your arm, how fast you're internally rotating your arm throughout the throw. Those are kind of like the 2 highest correlate arm-related velocity metrics to velocity, to pitching velocity. So those are kind of the 2 primary ones there. And then we have the same thing. It's all independent here. Each graph, each signal. And then torso kinematics, which is another big one for us. So torso rotation, pelvis rotation, and hip shoulder separation are all plotted in a graph, as well as the velocity, and then forward and lateral tilt. So leaning the chest forward and backward, and then side to side being that lateral tilt. So commonly with these, if an athlete is leaking is like a really common one. If you're pulling off to the side, tilting laterally too early, or getting too far out in front, you can use the trunk flexion angles of lateral and forward tilt to measure those and actually quantify, like, are they leaking? Are they dipping? Are they opening too early? How much hip shoulder separation are they creating? And then I think, one that we've commonly found in our SPM blogs and importance and kind of like having the term lead leg block be out there is knee flexion kinematics, knee extension angular velocity, and knee flexion angle. So we're commonly looking for knee flexion to be decreasing from foot plant through ball release. That indicates that you're extending your knee, you're blocking well, you're not sinking into that front knee and kind of like tracking forward, which usually inhibits pelvis rotation, inhibits torso rotation. Not what we want to do. So like a good block. Go ahead.
That's pretty good timing. Out of Mr. Pearson. Look at that extension right at foot plant, baby.
Guys been known to throw hard, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say, crazy, eh?
And knee extensive velocity is one of the biggest differences we found when doing our SPM, physical parameter mapping between hard throwers and soft throwers. So essentially examining the difference in signal magnitudes at certain times. That was like the first big key takeaway I think we had and made a big deal of in our first blog about it.
And just a shout out to Nate there too. Yeah. Nate's been huge in helping us develop this product in terms of what he wants to see as a player.
And also Nate providing very good mechanics.
Exactly. Yeah.
So really, really helpful on a lot of levels there.
Yeah.
So this is honestly a great model in terms of like just do this. This guy throws really hard. He's obviously a very large human being, but he passes through a lot of our check marks. That's kind of the big one with knee extension velocity. And I think the most easily understood graph by most people is kinematic sequencing, because it's talked about so often. Pitching mechanics, also in swing, hitting, even in golf, it's kind of like relative. All rotational sports that have some kind of like kinetic chain sequencing, transfer momentum, segment to segment. And in this, you're just looking for the transfer of rotational velocities peak to peak in a sequential order. You want your pelvis to rotate first, which it does here. Then you want your torso to be rotating at its peak, following that, and then ending the throw with elbow extension and then arm internal rotation peaks. So this is kind of the classic like 1, 2, 3, 4, pelvis, torso, arm, ball. Just efficiently transferring momentum and velocity into the ball. That's the report that you get from PitchAI, and that's
sweet.
Outside of kinetics, that's our biomechanics report. There aren't really many other metrics that we're missing. As far as like data on the back end, we get a little more in the lab, but
we have like 150 plus exported metrics.
Yeah.
But even then, a few of them, like we just have there as a like data column for a database, but
and that's literally what Colin is working on this week is like a metrics output as well. So it's not just these waveforms; it's going to be all those peak metrics that you want to see. And I was reminded to give you a subtle nudge from a Basecamp post that he was asking about something related to some torque values. So just if you see it.
Scope that out. We'll scope that out.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the goal, right? Like these waveform graphs are awesome when it comes to people who really understand what's happening in pitching mechanics. And this is a great way for them to work with the Driveline trainers. We also want to provide metrics that are going to make it so that if you've never seen a biomechanics report in the future, you'll get an idea as to what's going on. And I think that's probably the thing that I'm the most excited about for this project, is the ability to like get people to understand a little bit more about biomechanics in a way that's a lot more accessible to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to note too that the updated report that we have has like a short appendix after this. It will help you kind of like understand like, okay, I don't know what horizontal abduction is. It kind of like walks you through the description, what that actually is, and kind of like just even small things that we've had to work on, just like us getting on the same page, Sonne, in terms of like what's 0 and what's 90, you know, like, so if you have questions on that, there's a short appendix after. And if you have any feedback for that, definitely reach out, let us know, because we would, you know, any kind of like commonly asked questions or things that are touched on, we want to help, you know, get this in as many people's hands as possible, and hopefully provide them with like enough resources and assets to where they can understand it, pick it up, and kind of run with it right away.
Yep.
Yeah. Did you guys have anything else on the PitchAI front? Questions, thoughts? I mean, Lindley, Caravan.
Dude, I'm down to wrap it up and go get some shampoo, dude.
Yeah.
Some shampoo.
What product are you using in that hair, Mike?
Oh man, I think this is just like Head and Shoulders, to be
Canadian
completely
syrup.
honest with you.
Maple
Head and
syrup.
Shoulders, a little bit of MAC cream, just throw it in there, and then pandemic rules really have changed everything, and you don't have to shower all the time like maybe you used to. So
Splash of Tim Hortons coffee.
yeah, some moose musk, some maple syrup in there.
Throw some Timbits in there.
Are you living in Toronto right now, Mike?
I live in Hamilton, which is the Brooklyn of Toronto, as some people are referring to it. Yeah, Hamilton's about 45 minutes outside of Toronto. A little grittier city, but it's a great place to be.
All right, you guys got anything for Sonne? Questions, thoughts?
If you don't now, you know where to find me.
I'll ping follow-ups.
In the Basecamp DMs, Caravan, you know where to find me.
Thank you for coming on. I mean, it's late. It's 8:30 over there right now.
Oh yeah, it's hardly late. Yeah.
Well,
that's
early.
Great way to spend a night.
That's early for us, as you know.
I know. I was so afraid when you said, "Hey, can you come on the podcast?"
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna have to stay up till 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Like that's so much past my bedtime."
Yeah, there have been way too many times where Sonne and the PitchAI team are starting their workday, and I'll get a message from them that's like, really, it's it's got to be 7 a.m. on the East Coast, and I'll just reply back instantly at like 4 a.m.
Yeah. No, there's times where we're messaging in the mornings, and I'm like, this shouldn't be happening right now.
Like we get a couple messages in, and you're like, why are you awake? Worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really good. We got, here's some love in the chat. Yeah.
I was just gonna say the last thing is like, everybody who's sharing their PitchAI videos right now, like it's awesome to see. And you guys, if you find things that aren't working or you're not understanding, that's like really exciting challenges for us to undertake. And I think if there's one thing I've been the most proud of, it's how like between you guys, between our team, like when we find a challenge, we've really like come together and made things happen really, really fast. And I just found out how the YouTube chat works, so I can answer the question because I just saw it.
Perfect.
So we had a big beta sign up and got like 1,000 people to sign up for it. And we are expecting.
The question is about when's the iPhone version coming out?
Well, I was just go off of that. I just got the first iPhone version on my phone while we were sitting here today. So we're hoping within the next week to week and a half, we'll be able to get that out to people.
Sweet. There you have it. Anyone else?
Let's go.
Anything?
Thanks so much for coming on, man. That was good.
Yeah.
This is my sign off. Wait, 1 sec.
Oh no! He broke it.
We're gonna stop this.
No. Hold on.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next week.
Dude, why are matches hard to like?
PitchAI. Let us know. Oh, also,
come on, Caravan.
It's Dr. Mike Sonne on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
At Dr. Mike Sonne. Twitter's in the description below. We'll add links to everything.
It's also
else.
on the overlay. Oh, I guess
dude, Brady pranked my Matchbox from thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
What a debacle! What a great podcast that's ended in the worst, most disappointing way.
We're gonna stop streaming. See everyone. Thank you again.
He doesn't even have lumbar support in that chair.
Yeah,